Hey everybody, another GMG review. Today we're taking a look at Warlord Ascendant, Skirmish Battles in the World of Sacrifice. This is a 2023 indie game from Blackoat Entertainment in a sort of like small format. So this is like an A5 scale format rulebook, but also available digitally through all your usual digital sort of locations, and written by Alex T. Now this game is a solo, head-to-head or cooperative miniature skirmish game set in sort of a dark fantasy universe. It's got real Darkest Dungeon, Dark Souls, Elden Ring sort of vibes to it. And you play a sort of 5 or more model skirmish warband that you select from 6 different sort of prototype or archetypal factions, and then randomly generate equipment for. You go through adventures. You get to explore a map that is also procedurally generated, a hex map where you fill out all the locations. Find and hold territory, have it be attacked, or you get to expand and attack other people, and then fight a variety of monsters, beasts, and other factions. Now it takes place in the World of Sacrifice, which is a sort of OBR like setting designed by Alex T as well, where there's been a 100-year war between these two kingdoms, North and South, and you are exploring through no man's land, which is the ruins of like other cities, settlements, you know, all kinds of locations that have been destroyed between these two conflicting nations. So the Kingdom of Parvia and the Cadanor Dominion are the two sort of like warring factions. They've been warring for over 100 years. And you're setting your sights on all of the goods, riches, and stuff that could be in this middle section here. So you can see all these sort of like, there's a forest, there's all these sort of ruins and mountainous areas, other destroyed settlements in between. And so those two nations could be two of, almost Mordheim style, could be two of your factions, but there's other factions you can play as well, including mercenaries, commoners, and the Inquisition. It's a D20 based game with opposing roles and adding stats, and has a nice simple core stat block. So what we're going to do today is we are going to generate me a warband, because this, if you've never watched me play Forbidden Psalm or other indie skirmish games like this before, 5 Leagues from the Borderlands is another good example. The fun of this is doing this on camera with you guys, getting kind of the raw ingredients of what I have to make, and then playing through it. So starting from the beginning, you have to start by creating your warband. Usually it's about 5 to 7 models in your starting warband, and you'll have the model types dictated, but you have to randomly generate them equipment, as opposed to buying it. You also get D20 plus 20, so in this case I get 25 supplies in my starting stash that I can use to buy additional equipment. This warband roster, as well as the campaign sheets, and the template sheet for playing the game on, because it does play on an 8x10 plus 8x10 gridded surface, which is kind of interesting. So it plays on a, did I put it in here? What did I do with it? Nope, I didn't, I put it over here. I made piles of photocopies because these are the assets you can photocopy. Plays by a, here we go. It gives you printable sheets to either play on where you like draw on the terrain yourself, or you can do what I'm going to do, which is use this as a stencil to create my own boards that I can then rearrange. You start at level 1, as everybody does. No, wait, level 0, level 1. I think everyone starts at level 1. And then the level of your warband is equal to the highest level individual in your warband. Anatomy of a warband: numbers, recruits, leaders, stash, supplies, veterans. Level. Everyone starts at level 1. Yeah, so my warband starts at level 1 too. And I get to randomly generate a name for my warband too. So first, we're going to count through this. The I'm going to try and say it again. Cadnorians. I'm just going to say Cadnorians, and then stick with that. Commoners is number 2. Demonic Host is number 3. You can play as evil demons. The Inquisition is number 4. Mercenaries number 5. And Pavarians number 6. I'm going to D6 it to see which faction I end up playing to start off with. Number 1, so the Cadnorians. They've got kind of Bretonnian vibes to them, sort of a Dark Souls, you know, first kind of beaked helm sort of look to them. So let's see what the name of my warband is going to be, and it's 2d20. So I roll a 4 and a 17. I get Noble, the Noble Force. The Noble Force, cool. We are the Noble Force. All right, and then this is my gear stash. Now, in your gear stash, you can assign gear game to game from anybody, and you start with none in your actual stash. So my numbers, a Cadnorian warband starts with 1 sergeant, 2 corporals, and 2 levies. And these are the levies are my basic like grunts, and then my corporals are my veterans, and the sergeant is automatically the leader. So the leader is going to be a sergeant. and he starts with Inspiring Presence, weapon proficiencies. He can fight with a dagger, mace, short sword. Okay, so I don't have to worry about writing all that down. I can always look it up later. But my strength is going to be 2. My dex is 2. My con is 2. My spirit is kind of like my leadership is 3. My starting loyalty is 20, because if you lose loyalty by not getting paid and stuff like that, you can leave the warband. My speed, which is my movement in squares, is 3, and my upkeep I have to pay to keep in the warband every game is 3 as well. And you have to earn enough supplies to keep everybody paid on top of it. I have the ability of Inspiring Presence automatically. And that's whenever the sergeant activates, you can choose one ally within 3 of them, and they get advantage in the next attack roll made before the next end of the round, or the next attack roll they make before the end of the next round. So basically, you can yell at somebody to fight better. You also have your command actions, and you can pick 3 of these per game. And there's another page for putting these down afterwards. But I'm gonna write down all my recruits first and figure out who I'm gonna be fighting with. So two soldiers, and then 2 veterans. So this is going to be. Weirdly, there's no place to write your name. So this is going to be my sergeant. And he's a leader. And I'll name him later. This is my first soldier. He's a veteran. I have another soldier who's a veteran. And then I've got a levy, who's a recruit. He's like a basic level guy. And then one more on the next page. Oh, you get name for these guys. Weird, there's one name box for all of these guys. Oh no, it's my warband name. And this will also be a levy. Okay, so now I gotta randomly generate my items for everybody. So supplies, veteran, starting gear. All warbands start with some gear. Roll once per character on the random weapon, random armor, and twice on the random gear table. So if I have 5 characters, I get to make 5 rolls for each, and then I can assign it however I want. So the pages for that, it's a D100 table at the end. So I get 5 rolls on the random weapon table, and then I can assign them however I want. So we have a 6, which are 60, sorry, which is going to be a longsword. So somebody has a longsword, and I'll put these right in my stash. I have a 58, which is another longsword. Cool, that's handy for finding models, especially when all this is said and done. Then I got a 24, which is a great axe. Cool. I'm feeling pretty noble at this point. Number 3, 12, which is a composite bow. Cool. So at least I don't have to buy one bow, because my advantage for being this faction is good at bows. And then 48, which is a javelin. Weird. Javelin. And then I get 5 rolls on the random armor table. So armors I'm going to find, that's a 10, which is a chain shirt. Handy. 28, which is a hauberk. So these feel like I'm going to find some knightly stuff here at least. 44, which is hide armor. It's like leather armor. And then a 31, which is half plate. Oh, handy. My leader's getting that probably. And then finally 80, which is scale mail. Neat. And then twice on the gear table. So 10 rolls of the starting gear. And twice on the random gear table per guy. Okay, so random gear. 51, I found a map. So I should find 10 maps. 52, which is a map. Okay, so times 2. I found 83, which is a skill manual. We'll figure out what these do later. And then 78, which is a potion. Oh, and I get to randomly see what type of potion it is. I'll roll for that out. Actually, random potion. I roll on the other side. 86, a potion of dulled heart. Whatever that means. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4. That's number 5. So 59. Another map. Okay, wicked. All the maps. 8, which is alcohol. Handy for when you're out in the wastes. 1, which is more alcohol. That's a times 2. Got lots of booze. 20, which is an antidote. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2 more. 1, more alcohol. So 3 alcohols and 3 maps. Perfect. Last one. 15 antidotes. So 2 antidotes. Well, we got medicine, alcohol, and maps. This sounds great. And 1 potion. And that's basically how you start generating your warband. Now, the next thing you need to do is you need to pick command actions, but I think you do that per game. Each warband has a set of unique command actions. These are available for the start of your turn as long as your leader's alive. Leaders have access to a maximum of 3 per battle to be chosen before the battle commences. So I don't have to write these down, but they're free orders I can do. So for my Cadnorians, the Cadnorian Dominion is one of the 2 kingdoms that initiated the 100 Years' War, ruled by Bastion Hennek V. Cadnor is a god-fearing feudal nation with a deep chivalric tradition that lives side by side with a population that survives mostly on hunting and trade. Among the many disputes they have with the kingdom of Bavaria, having lost to them the honor of being the protectors of the faith, a title granted by the church to a single nation that marks as fierce supporters of their interests, is probably the hardest thing for them to swallow. Militarily speaking, they're experts in incorporating their ancient archery tradition with the more chivalric ones. We have knights and archers. And then they get to add 2 to all ranged attack rolls. So that's an interesting note. And I can make that in my notes section. Command actions and combat maneuvers, which are the skills that I can learn on top of that. So command actions, I have like brilliant strategy. Spend 1 of your remaining orders this round to gain D4 extra orders. Cover each other. All friendly characters that are fighting in squares adjacent to other friendly characters get 3 defense level until the beginning of the next round. Eyes open. During a turn, all characters equipped with ranged weapons automatically remain in Overwatch, even if they both moved and acted. So you get a bunch of these things that you can do like once per game, like feats, to allow your guys to have additional abilities. Okay, so generating my guys. Now let's go over their stat blocks and see what they actually do. So first you have your strength. This determines how strong a character is, so performing feats like lifting heavy objects. So if I was to do a action, and in the game tenses, it's a lot like D&D where actions have a target number, I'd roll a D20, so I roll a 20, and out of my strength I get a total of 22 to try and beat that, whatever the action requirement is for that. Dexterity, same thing, picking locks, using your hands, however you want that to be, but it also affects your defense level, which is always 8 plus your dexterity. Plus whatever armor you have. So in this case, my sergeant's defense level right now would be 10. Constitution, this shows how physically resilient you are, as well as how you fare against harmful effects. It also determines your vigor, which is your hit points, and it's usually equal to your Constitution times 3. So if I have a Constitution of 2 for my leader, then my vigor is going to be 6, right? Because Con 2 times 3 is 6. Same with my vigor on my soldiers, which I believe is also 2. They have 1 for strength, 2 for dex, and 2 for con, yeah. And their spirit is also 2. Now their strength ability is 12. Everyone starts at level 1. And yes, theirs would also be 6, so they would also have vigor 6. And then my levies, who only have a con of 1, they would have a vigor of 3. And their stats, they have dex of 2, which is cool, because it means if they're using bows, they're decent at them. But their spirit, con, and strength, they're all 1. Also level 1. And then their loyalty starts at 10, so a little less high. Everybody's speed 3 still, so they're relatively quick. So if you want to compare that to other nations, if we look at, let's say, the demonic host, their leader, the witness, he has 2 strength, 1 dexterity, but his con is 3, which means he has 9 hit points to begin with. And his spirit's also 3, so his leadership's pretty high. The twisted soldiers, the veterans, are also con 3, so they're definitely tough. Your spirit, which is your capacity of your mental strength, will, and charisma. And then your defense level, which like I said is 8 plus dex. That's your target number if you're going to get attacked. So for instance, if this guy's not wearing any armor, and he's got his dex of 2 and a plus 8 base, you have to roll a 10 plus with your attack bonus, depending on the weapon you're using, to try and hit him. So usually it's strength if it's melee, it's dex if it's anything else. But we'll go through and see what my armor will give me before I do that. Then your level, the higher character's loyalty. Sorry, as the characters earn experience points, their maximum level becomes 10. Loyalty, the higher a character's loyalty is, the less prone they are to running away when a morale check's required. And then your recruitment cost, you'll eventually want to increase your warband size. So there's a recruiting action you can do after the game ends. If you perform the recruiting action, you see what level of character is available. These aren't like no man's land. Like there's crazy, it's not great out there. But the idea is that then you have to pay the recruitment cost out of your stash. So everyone has a recruitment cost as well. But you have to worry about that on your stat block. Okay, speed is, like I said, the squares per round you can move, total experience, which is what you'd earn per game. And then upkeep. The game starts with a maintenance phase where you have to like maintain and upkeep your warband. You have to do it for your first game, but every game after that, you're gonna check to see if people are gonna stay and if you can pay them or not. So with 25 supplies, what's my upkeep on everybody? I have 3 for the boss. The veterans are 2, and so are the levies. So if I don't have a total of 11 in my stash at the end of every game, then everybody just leaves. So for this guy, he's also level 1. Let's just show that. 10, speed 3, his strength is 1, his dex is 2, his con is 1, his spirit is 1, and that means his vigor is 3. All right, so I got some gear to hand out here, and then we're gonna start talking about the actual game play mechanics and like the phases, the how to play for core concepts. You can also have a combat maneuver, and every character is going to get 1. So after I equip them, I'm also going to pick these. So for instance, when you create your characters, they'll have something special about them, and those combat maneuvers, each character brings something different to the table. This is support from the warband. These are unique actions on the combat maneuvers, and everybody starts with 1. You're free to pick the same combat maneuver for different characters, though, and keep in mind that neither of these maneuvers you bring are assigned to a specific character. All the characters can use all the maneuvers that you bring. Yeah, so 1 per character to the battlefield. You can only pick a combat maneuver for each character once as soon as the character joins the warband or when creating it for the first time, and they can't be changed afterwards. So like all or nothing, the chosen character can make an extra attack, but their defense level is reduced to 4, so you can like make yourself easier to hit to attack. Battle cry, it's for leaders and veterans only. The character lets out a fierce cry, inspiring their allies. All friendly units in a 5 square radius receive +1 to their attack rolls until the next round as a free action. And everything in here is, I believe, counts as an action unless it says otherwise. It's like combat awareness. After being the target of an attack, the character can make a spirit check. If their roll is higher than the opponent, they ignore all damage. I think some of these will say if they are or aren't. Adrenaline surge. The chosen character acts first regardless of who won the initiative this round. All right, and we'll figure those out in a second. And then improving your character. So after each battle, you earn experience based on the following. Any character that remains in play once the battle phase is over receives an experience. Any character that takes down an enemy veteran gets an experience. If you take down a leader, you get +2 experience. And then as you go up in level, for 4 experience, you gain a feat point, which means you can learn a feat. If you get 10 experience, your level becomes 3. Roll on the ability improvement table and gain a feat point. Gain a feat point, the character can now bring 2 combat maneuvers to battle. Roll on the ability improvement table and gain a feat point, gain a feat point, gain a feat point. And then each feat can be taken once per character. So like a tier 1 feat, you have to have a tier 1 feat to take a tier 2, I believe. So like accurate, the target ignore 1 defense level from the target. So like you're basically +1 to hit, but it's more that they're -1 defense level. Bags and belts, you can carry 2 extra consumable items. Close quarters expert, the character doesn't attack with disadvantage when using a ranged weapon in melee combat, so if you're trying to shoot someone while you're in melee. Quick, you can move an extra square. And to unlock the second feat row, you need to spend 2 feat points, and to unlock the third feat row, you have to spend 3 feat points. These feats can only be allocated in any of the unlocked feat rows. This way, a player is somewhat forced to pick several feats in the early levels up rows until all 5 feat rows are unlocked. Yeah, so basically once you've totaled, so like if you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 feat rows, you have to have spent 5 of them, and then you can start buying feats in the final tier. But you can mix them anywhere you want. Interesting. All right, so how to play. Like I said, ability checks. The core mechanic in Warlord Ascendant is the ability check. An ability check is performed by rolling a d20 and adding the corresponding ability and then comparing it to the target number. So like very easy would be like a TN of 5. So like a very easy strength test for my sergeant is a 5. I rolled an 11 + 2 for my strength and I get a 13. Advantage or disadvantage, it's roll, discard the lowest or highest, just like in D&D. And then crit failures and crit successes. A 1's a critical failure, it's the worst possible consequence, and a 20 is a natural success. You can get critical hits and stuff that actually have, like, depending on the type of weapon you have different effects. And opposed checks, whenever two characters are affecting each other, there's no target number, they both roll a d20 and add their bonuses, and the high roller is the winner. All right, management phase. So every game starts with the management phase. And there's basically 6 steps in the management phase of what's going to happen. So you start off by rolling in the management events table. So let's say I'm starting my first game. I'd roll a d20 in this table, a 16. On your way to the battle, you discover some untapped hunting grounds and just gain d10 supplies. So sweet, I gain 1 supply. From there, it's time to determine the fate of any wounded characters. Now, if anyone's out of action at the end of the game, and this won't apply in the first game, you'd roll a recovery test. Now, you add your con to this. So in this case, I rolled a 14, let's say, for my sergeant. That means the character has suffered grievous wounds but survives. They miss the next d4 plus 1 battles. A 1 to 5 just kills the character. On a 6 to 8, they're dead unless a friendly model that didn't go out of action makes a spirit check on a 14, and they stabilize them basically enough to survive. In any sort of like case, a 1 to 15, you always roll on a permanent wound. So you could have like things happen like a 6, damaged nerves, you're -1 dexterity. So it's pretty rough when you get taken out in this game. Now the nice thing is the game actually scales though to your warband member count. So you're never gonna find yourself overwhelmed by enemies because most of the enemy warbands or enemy beasts or monsters you encounter are like leader +1 per warband member. So you're typically not going to be like completely screwed if you lose half your warband, but you could have nobody show up. Then you have pay your warband members' salary as well as any other form of upkeep. So salary is the total upkeep cost, and what happens is if you lose or if you don't pay them, their loyalty will go down. And loyalty is also your morale. Now the only model whose loyalty never changes is the leader. His is always going to be 20, but for anybody else, if you are not paid, you lose a loyalty. If your warband's leader is changed, all the other characters lose their loyalty down by 1. If you capture a location though, like a new location, if you expand, your loyalty goes up by 1. And if you gain a level, your loyalty goes up by 1. And other things can also change loyalties. So you think of the loyalty like a morale check. So you're trying to hit, you're trying to roll basically based on your loyalty to see what your morale is. And if your loyalty goes below 8, you're going to start making morale checks all the time in every maintenance phase to even stay. And if you fail that morale check, then you're going to basically be running, or you're going to take all your stuff. You're going to leave the warband. So people can actually just like take off if things are going really badly, and you have to try and find and hire new ones. Then you can send out your characters to do any of the available actions. So actions are things like explore, where you're going to find the next location that you're adjacent to. So on the campaign map, you could generate a new location, and that location will give you things that you can use later on in other battles, but also potentially the enemy that you're going to fight when you go in there. So if a character goes and explores, on a 3, the character comes across a wounded warrior. If they pass a Spirit TN 14 check, they can stabilize them. The warrior must rest until the next campaign turn, but can join as a free recruit if you want. And then once you go there, there's a location name, so you write the name in the square. So you roll a D100 3 times, and you can mix those words any way you want to name the location. So like for instance, I rolled a 17, which is Himmelshane. Then I rolled a 2, which is Golden. And then I rolled a 55, which is Creek. So the Golden Creek of Himmelshane would be like the thing I found, and I would mark that on my map as I explore. So I'm actually really looking forward to the campaign location thing, because I'm going to get to draw all over this thing and put little names down. And if you ever saw my map for 5 Leagues from the Borderlands, I actually really like making fantasy maps. It's a lot of fun. So as I explore, I can make new territories and stuff. Then once you've done the other actions you can do, apart from explore, you can also do things like retrain, so you can change one of your feats for another feat. You can study, just gain an XP, but you have to control a monastery location to do it. You can recruit, so if you go to recruit, you add your spirit to the roll, but you roll a d20. So I got a 20 here. You can find a veteran that wants to join your ranks, which means you can then spend resources and supplies to try and get people. And also patrol, which is during the upcoming battle phase when you roll to see what kind of battle you're doing. You can never be surprised. So you get surprised sometimes, and it gives you adverse battlefield conditions. So once you've done all your character actions, then you can select a new target for expansion. So you can, once you've explored a location to see what's there, you can decide you want to go take that over. Oh, and sorry, each location also has a trait. I don't think I rolled that to show you guys. But the reason you would want to take it over is, I rolled a 17. There's a warehouse along that river. Increase your warband stash by 50. Losing access to a warehouse reduces your current supplies by 50 until you take it back. So basically your stash goes up by 50, which is like a huge amount of stuff you can now carry. Because your stash is like the maximum cap for items you can have before you go to assign them to your characters each game. And then select a new target for expansion and then determine what the battle phase is going to be. So when you roll for the battle phase, and this is when you start setting up your game, step one is you find out what your battle phase trigger is going to be. And that means you roll a D100, and for every location you control, you become more vulnerable to people attacking you as opposed to you expanding. The higher you roll, so I rolled a 93 here. A randomly selected location under your control is attacked. Roll in the enemy type table on page 53 to see what you fight. Losing the battle means you lose control of the location, which is now occupied by enemy forces. So you can explore and know what's there, but you only control them as long as you can hold them. So then I would roll over here on the enemy table and roll a D12, get a 1, so it's Achelians. So then you generate an Achelian warband to be facing you. So once you've done that, is it offensive or defensive? In this case, I'm playing a defensive game. Regardless of the reason, the process for setting the battle is the same, but I'm on the defense as opposed to the offense. The result of the game means I keep my location though, as opposed to expanding into a new one. Then I pick my gear. Everybody can carry up to 2 weapons, 1 armor, and 2 items. And then pick your command actions. So from my list of command actions that my faction is available, I can pick 3. And these will be my once per game actions that I can do. So like I can use reaction, fire, volley, and rally, for instance. Then determine the enemy, so I've rolled that already. Step 4, determine the battle's difficulty. Once you know how you'll be facing, you must see how it's going to be. You must use your warband's level. The level is equal to the highest level amongst the characters in the warband. And for each level above the first that your warband has, randomly select 1 ability for each enemy and increase it by 1. So for every 2 levels above the first that your warband has, roll once in the enemy trait table. This trait applies to all members of the warband. So for instance, if you've got, like let's say there's 3 guys who survived the last game, they go to fight. I rolled Achelians, and there's a whole list of bad guys here at the back, including beasts. So the Achelians, warband, mercenary warband, possessed warband, soldier warband, trolls, undead, wolves, swords for hire. Oh, I went too far. Those are beasts and enemies. So Achelian War Dancer is the leader. He automatically shows up, and then there'll be 1 per member of your warband, Achelian warriors. So if I had 3 guys show up, there'd be a leader and 3 warriors, so it'd be 4 people total fighting. And you're always going to get a slight numerical advantage to the bad guys, just because they are operating off the AI system in here, which means they're a little dumber and more predictable. So if I was level, let's say 3 as my highest level in the warband, 1 model in like randomly selected from those 4 guys would have a stat increase. So I'd roll a D6, and let's say the leader I rolled a 1, he gets +1 strength. And that's just to offset when you get higher level, you're not just fighting the base creatures that are in the rulebook. And then for every 2 levels you have above the first that your enemy warband has, for each 2 levels above the first that your warband has, roll once on the traits table, and you roll a D20, and this would be like a skill. So a 16, agile fighters, every character in that warband gains advantage on attack rolls if they moved first. So you get like a charge bonus. And that's cool because not just the monsters aren't going to be the same every time in the bestiary, because they're going to randomly increase in power as you increase in power. So that's exciting because it means that when you're playing a procedurally generated game like this, keeping the power appropriate to who you are fighting, so it always feels like you have a chance, but it also doesn't get too easy, is a tough thing to do, and I like that that's baked into the system. Then you generate your map, so setting up the battle area. So this is where it gets neat. So like I said, there are sheets here to do drawn ones, and they also recommend you could use any type of like 8x10 scale like map book. The Loki battle mats is one of the ones they talk about in this book, and I actually have those. But I'm going to make my own tiles because conveniently I've already started like mentally percolating how I'm going to make the tiles for this. But there's lots of like boards out there that are an 8x10 because it's a standard like photo frame size. And that means you just, for the ones that are printable, you're looking at a grid that's 8 squares and 1 inch by 10 squares and 1 inch. I can make a lot of those that are very easy to do. And it says put 2 together. So if you're using existing things like the Loki Battle Mats book, We recommend using 2 standard 1-page maps together. In case you're using 2 printed out blank squares, make sure they're A4 letter size and then put 2 together. You are, of course, free to modify the player area size to your preference. When using an illustrated map, make sure to identify any potential cover and difficult terrain. Now, if you're not using like a printed map that already has like terrain and stuff on it, you place cover, place 4 pieces of cover. The largest crosses 3 squares and the other partial cover. The next 2 pieces covers 2 squares, with 1 offering partial and 2 offering the last 2 create a 1 square full of cover. So like basically it says make these types of options for when you're using one that already has stuff drawn on it. Alternatively, roll twice on the random cover table and then roll d4 to see what the size of each of them are. So what I'll probably do is make the pre-constructed 4 pieces of cover, but then have it themed to each of the boards. So you're gonna make a total of 3 by 1s and then 2 2-piece squares. And they can be anything. They can be barrels, they can be walls, they can be ruins, they can be trees. The goal here is that I'm going to make them match the boards that I make so that they look appropriate to what's on there. And then just place them as described on page 56. So you want to try and fill the board with them. Then you have terrain elements. When using a blank map, you want to make random terrain elements too. So like water, hills, forests, rough ground, marsh, gullies. And then when placing each of the terrain elements, try to group them in a way that makes sense. And then determine a strategic position. So this is really neat. There is a point on the battlefield which is the most advantageous for you to hold. And if you do so mechanically during the game, normally each player gets to activate 3 models per turn. Doesn't matter what number of models you have. Only 3 of them get to do anything each round. If you hold the strategic point, an additional 1 can be activated each round. So that point's randomly generated by randomly dicing off. So like if you have a D16, if it's going to be 10 by 16 when you put the 2 mats together, you'd roll 16 and 10 and find the point in the battlefield that is the strategic like advantage. And you hold it by being on it. And then place carriers in the combat area. With the combat area determined, it's time to place all the combatants down. If one side surprised the other, like if you rolled it during the pregame, they gain +2 initiative for the first round, and they can choose to deploy on an adjacent side after the enemies are placed. However, they're placed on their side's first hex row as normal. So no matter what sides are facing each other, you're along the first squares. And then if you're surprised, you roll to see what happens. Roll for placement once for each group. So like you could be randomly on the same side. Combatants are placed on the first square row of their side. If the first row is full, place them on the second and so on. Place each band as far as possible from each other. If both players must be placed on the same side, they must be as separate from each other as possible, remaining on the same side. So like you'd roll d4, I'm just gonna roll a d8 and have it, so 4 and 4. They would be in opposite corners on the same side then. And then they would fill in going along the row. And then battle events. After setting up the combat area, but before the actual fighting starts, you roll once in the battle events to see what happens, because there's going to be some random encounter. So on 9 in this case, downpour, it's raining, the whole battlefield becomes difficult terrain because it gets so muddy. And then combat. So combat's, you roll initiative and add your leader's spirit. So that's your leadership thing. So like my sergeant's going to be spirit 3. So I roll a 5 here. Say my opponent's is 2. They roll 11. That means they get to go first that turn. And then each warband issues 3 orders per turn. During the combat turn, you can move a number of squares equal to your speed and take 1 action. So you can attack, you can charge, which means you can move again equal to your speed, then make an attack adjacent to the enemy with +1. You can dash, which is just move again. You can interact, which means like do something, or like grab a piece of equipment from a fallen comrade. Use a combat maneuver, feat, or other skill, if it says they need to, or use an item. And then turn versus round. Turn is when it's your turn to activate a model, because you go back and forth, and then round is when both players are done doing all 3 of their actions. Attack roll, like I said earlier, it's pretty straightforward. You're gonna roll and try and hit your opponent's defense level. So if my defense level, like let's say I'm wearing my hauberk. Actually, I've got half plate for that. I have some half plate. What's half plate gonna give me? Half plate gives me, half plate gives me a DL of 15, but I don't add my dex bonus. So like I don't get any dex to that, whereas the cuirass, the scale mail, is 14 plus dex. The half plate's actually worse than me taking the cuirass or the scale mail, of which I have 1 of each, because then I would get to add my my dexterity of 2. And then you'd add that together, so you'd roll your dice and you'd attack. Let's say I've got that 16. So there's a 16, that person would hit me. And then how much damage they would do would be equal to a d4, and this damage may be modified by weapon abilities. So for instance, if I'm gonna hit with what I've got, long swords. So longsword is slashing defensive. So yeah, just D4 damage. Defensive is like a simple thing, +1 defense level if I combine it with a shield. That's cool. And then things to remember, characters wielding a weapon do not have the corresponding weapon proficiency, would have disadvantage. So when I go back and look at my characters, they have a list of what they have as their weapons that are their preferences for proficiencies. So my sergeant can use a dagger, mace, short sword, spear, bastard sword, long sword, morning sword. So morning sword's in there. I can't use a great axe though. I don't think any of my guys can use great axes. Nope, so my great axe is effectively useless. I'm gonna have disadvantage, I think, if I use that weapon on anybody. So even though that great axe is cool and does slashing damage and it's powerful 1, which means it does +1 damage whenever it hits, I'm gonna be at disadvantage, which means I roll 2 dice, pick the lowest when I use it until somebody can learn a proficiency. Well, that's great. Yeah, nobody has access to it, which is really funny. Although I guess I could, I wonder if there's like a feat I could buy or one of my skills I could buy. Anyway, we'll look at that in a second. But that's the basics for like combat. And then it works the same for shooting and ranged combat. If it has the range trait, you can shoot and a ranged weapon. So for instance, like what did I find for ranged weapons? I found a composite bow and a javelin. So the composite bow, when I look at ranged weapons, has a range of 15 squares. It's two-handed as piercing damage. Piercing damage doesn't say. Powerful, reach, simple, slow, thrown, two-handed, unblockable, unwieldy, finesse, parrying. I wonder what that means. I wonder what piercing damage means. Slash. Oh no, that's for my critical attack. That's right. And then the special rule for it is just two-handed. So piercing damage is just the type. So if you land a critical, then you get to roll on the table. So for instance, if I got that piercing one for bombs, piercing, I'd roll a d10 and get a 10. Wound in the neck, the target just goes right into action. So that's cool that you get like a little bonus like ability with your weapons afterwards too if you roll a 20. And then damage type, because certain things can be vulnerable to certain damage types. Slashing, caused mainly by certain weapons and creatures, such as swords. +1 damage against targets wearing light armor, +2 when they're wearing no armor. So like the swords get +1 damage against people not wearing any armor. And +2 when they're wearing, or sorry, if they're wearing light, +2 if they're wearing none. And then piercing damage, attacks deal +2 damage when the character performs the attack action before their target in the same round. So if the person's unactivated, they get +2 damage because they're kind of sitting still. That's a neat ability. All right, and then we have our NPC and enemy actions during combat. Because like NPCs, like monsters can show up from events, and then also any time you're playing it solo, it's going to be enemy activations are going to be all using this. So you have different types. Do you have melee weapons, you have ranged weapons, or are you mixed? And then you have like a yes-no thing. So like for the decision tree melee, are there any objectives not under your control? Yes, go to step 2. Are there any enemies in play? Yes. Charge towards the nearest one if possible, otherwise dash. Are any enemies in charge range? Yes, charge. So melee stuff's gonna move and dash towards the nearest model. Ranged, are there any objectives not under your control? Yes, go to step 2. No, go to step 3. If I move one enemy be within shooting range, yes, then you move. No, then you dash towards an objective. And if I move, will any enemies be within shooting range? Yes, move and shoot if possible, and no, dash towards the enemy. So the goal here is that like you have basically smart NPCs. And then enemy and NPC attitudes, there'll be an attitude listed typically in like their section. So cautious for an overlord leader. If you're cautious, characters will move directly towards the target, moving as close as possible by the shortest possible route. A cautious character will stop if they end their max movement in cover. If basically, if you can't make it towards the model to try and do what you're trying to do, you'll stop near cover. You're not going to move into the open otherwise. But aggressive will try and get as close as possible without like worrying about their safety. And then bestial opponents, they have like target priorities that could become random because they're monsters. You get your conditions, like active, bestial, you can become enraged and stuff like that, fearsome, out of action, overwhelmed, paralyzed. And like I said, the loyalty and morale stuff. So as soon as you get to a certain level of loyalty, you gotta start running away. So if your loyalty is 3 or less, Must make a morale check at the start of every management phase. On a 4 to 6, -2 to morale checks. On a 7 to 8, -1 to morale checks. On a 9 to 12, no change. So you're basically still healthy. On a 13 to 14, +1 to morale check. So the more loyal you are, like if you're a leader, you never require a morale check because you're as loyal as you're possibly going to be because it's your warband. So that's it. And then we get some ideas for like the end of the battle phase. If you held the field, then you win and you get whatever the XP is based on that. And you also get your supplies back. If someone has people down and they don't hold the field at the end, they lose their items. So you can quickly start running out of items. And they get to loot the remains of their opponents for valuable gear, pelts, and furs, and they get 2d20 supplies. Any gear and equipment belonging to characters out of action is recovered only if you held the field. Next, tally the XP earned by those characters. So like in a solo and co-op game, it just means if you lost, you're gonna lose your gear and equipment, which is bad. But if you won, then you're gonna keep all your gear and equipment even on your down models, and you're also gonna get to loot their corpses. Some guidelines for co-op games, and then converting your character guidelines. And then all the stat lines, so like all your beasts, the bandit warbands, the Kellion warbands, a drake, so like a rule for a dragon. One of the things that in here I didn't really know is how could you represent bigger models? And I didn't see any rules in here for size, but I'll probably create some rules for size, for how many squares they take up. Giant centipedes, giant lizards, giant spiders, harpies, ikanus, random soldiers, so just like a catch-all for soldiers. Undead warbands have skeletons and ghosts and zombies, wolves. And then you can also find swords for hire. And there's some like cool sort of like demonic things you can hire. Thorn bloods, kind of monstery, more fantasy-based stuff. And that's the loot and gear section, and that's it. So I'm excited about this game. I'm excited about this game for a couple reasons. One, I think that these sort of like do-it-yourself, obviously like skirmish games are always my favorites. But I like that this one has so much structure. There's lots of prompting still. There's still a lot of like randomly roll your gear, randomly like pick your models, convert your guys. But on top of that, you have like some structure that basically fits in the story. So knowing about the two nations, knowing that there's like demonic possession, which has like caused this war. The art in here is really grim and cool, the black and white art, which I should credit to the artist. Illustrated by Simone Tameta, ORB, cartography by Glenn Seal, and the layout by Alex T. So yeah, and the Incense on our role-playing logo is by Alan Barr. Very cool. So yeah, and their Patreon is patreon.com/blackoathgames. So this is right up my alley, mostly because I think the themes are really cool, the execution's really good, and I see a lot of replayability in this. For the same reason I like 5 Leagues from the Borderlands, because it has that little bit of extra crunch in the pre and post game. But I also love the random generation of Forbidden Psalm. This feels like a good in-between. If you don't want the hyper-detailed procedural stuff that's in 5 Leagues, but you also want a little bit more like theme setting and like direction than Forbidden Psalm, this feels like a good mid-range. And I actually really like the idea of making these boards that I can rearrange to have different settings and themes with their own little terrain stuff sort of like placed down on it. So yeah, I'm kind of pumped, I'll be honest. This is, I haven't been this excited about an indie game in a while, and you guys can check it out through the links below. So big thanks for watching, and we'll see you for more GMG reviews in the future. Done a MASH, happy gaming.